Hello and welcome to this series on government performance management. This series is not about intellectual debates and philosophies of government performance management. Rather, this series is about a step-by-step practical approach used by many countries around the world and which also represents best practice in this field. This series will answer 4 key questions that would be of central concern to those interested in this topic of government performance management. First, what is the main problem that we are trying to solve? What are the leading approaches to finding a solution based on management theory and management practice? What are best practice effective methodologies that can be used? What is, finally, a practical way of implementing these best practice methodologies? That indeed is the unique selling proposition of this series, that it talks about how to convert theory into action and vision into results. Let's get started. We will now, as we agreed, discuss the problem first, because if we don't agree on the problem, then it is very hard to find a solution. If the diagnosis is not correct, the prescription can't be correct. So let's look at some of the problems. Now, I have spent my entire career as a professor reading books on what is the basic problem of government or public sector in general. And different authors say it in different words and different languages, but basically there are 2 principal explanations why governments do not do well. And I have tried it with people who have worked all their lives in the government, and they tend to agree. The first problem is that the government is faced with multiple principals who have multiple objectives. For example, a typical government department is faced with Parliament, because the Parliament feels they have a right to oversee the government department. It is also faced with Finance Ministry, the Administrative Ministry, in many countries, the Planning Ministry. And on top of that, not just that, they also have the media, the vigilance agencies, in many countries, the audit institutions. So therefore, each one of these agencies feels they have a legitimate right to supervise the government department. Now, that should not be a problem, because after all, in private sector, they have hundreds and thousands of shareholders. But the difference between the public and the private sector is that whereas in the private sector, all of them have the same objective, in the public sector, everyone has a different objective. Somebody wants equity, somebody wants efficiency, somebody wants political objectives to be fulfilled, somebody wants non-political objectives to be fulfilled. So as a result, you have a situation in the government or in public sector in general where there are multiple principals who have multiple goals which are often conflicting. You can't have it all. You can't have both efficiency and equity in most cases. Therefore, people running the government do not know what race they are running. If they jump too high, they are told, look, this is not a high jump, this is a broad jump. If they run too fast, they're told, look, this is not a dash, it's a marathon. So whatever they do, there is some backseat driver who seems to be thinking differently. As a result, most civil servants tend to give up, and they decide that they are going to just follow the rules, lie low, and survive the system. And if there is any collateral benefit, then so be it. But they're not going to go out and try very hard to achieve the good, because whatever they do, they're going to be questioned. And that leads to paralysis, and that's just not a good situation. It leads to demotivation on top of that. Before I move on, I'd like to share a clip from Fareed Zakaria's Global Public Square, where he is interviewing one of India's billionaires and the co-founder of Infosys, Mr. Nandan Nilekani. Have a look.
Well, they were actually quite supportive,
but that's at least the mythology. Now you're in the heart of government. How much more difficult is it to deal with the bureaucracies, or which is worse, the bureaucratic obstacles or the political obstacles?
Well, I think the way I see it is simply that in the private sector, the number of people you have to convince is much less. You convince your management team, your board, your investors, your analysts, and you go and do something, go in a new direction, buy a company, whatever. In the public space, you are answerable to a lot more stakeholders. There's the government, parliament, the bureaucracy, activists, journalists, the judicial system, the investigators, So I think what I've learned is that the amount of time you have to invest in evangelizing and consensus building is hugely much more in the public space. And, crafting a strategy which is sort of acceptable to everybody really takes a great deal of time. And that's where the big difference to me between the two worlds.
Do you think that you will face off?
Now let's move on to the next problem. The next problem is what I call the not me syndrome. This is a classic problem in government, where whenever you're blamed for something, you say it wasn't me. When, for instance, my favorite example, which probably is not a charitable one, but I will use it, Air India, a lot of Indians complain that the service is not good. It's not as good as it used to be when it was run by Mr. Tata, who was the original owner of Air India. According to people, it's not satisfactory. But when you go and tell the airlines, which is a public enterprise, that why can't you operate like the other commercial airlines? They will turn and say, what do you mean? We can do a better job than any private sector airline, except that the civil servants in the Department of Civil Aviations do not let us have a free hand in operating it. They are the backseat drivers. They decide how many flights, where they will land, who will do the job, etc. Hence, they pass the blame to the Department of Civil Aviation. When I go and speak to the officers in the Department of Civil Aviation, they tell me, Professor, you're at the wrong place. It's actually not us. It is the politicians who are interfering. They are the ones who decide how many planes will be bought, what type of plane would be bought, where will it land, and where will be a new airport, which airport will be renovated. These are decisions taken by higher ups. It's the politicians who decide. And when I go and talk to the parliamentarians and say, sir, can you leave this airline alone and let it be the best airline it can be, as it used to be, so that we can all be proud of? The politicians turn to you and say, what do you mean? It's not us. We are not interfering with the public enterprise. We are only doing what people have asked us to do. So in a sense, it's the people who start complaining, and the entire buck gets passed back to the people. And this vicious cycle of passing the buck goes on ad infinitum. And in fact, this really is a problem why things don't improve, because no one is held accountable. And so this passing of the buck is another major problem. Watching that, now we have discussed the problems that are faced by the government. Basically, we have two big problems. One, what we call multiple principles with multiple objectives, which are often conflicting. As a result, the government departments and the managers do not know what is really expected of them. So if they don't know which race to run, it's unlikely they will win that race. Second problem, what I call the not me syndrome, is where no one is accountable. You do not know who to catch for the inefficiencies in the operations. As a result, no one is responsible, and hence, because of that, the efficiency goes down and the performance of the government is perceived by outsiders to be poor. Now, in the next segment, we are going to talk about solutions. I think we should just end it here, and I look forward to seeing you in the next segment, where we will talk about what can be done. Looking at the international experience, what is it that the governments are doing to solve this problem? Look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you very much for being with us.